So let's talk about Mortarion and whether or not Mortarion is worth taking in your Death Guard army. Welcome to Twisted Dice, I'm Darren, and today it's all about Mortarion, and I'm going to talk about why Mortarion should be in your Death Guard army. So with the Death Guard Codex just dropped, there's been a lot of changes in the way Death Guard play, especially down the ways of what type of troops and how you field them on the actual army itself, and also being limited in a battalion or in a detachment of only taking one major character. So for instance, you can only really take one Demon Prince. So Mortarion has had one hell of a massive great buff on him. So from the previous edition, he was toughness 7. Now he's gone up to toughness 8, which makes Mortarion an absolute freaking beast. Now, one of the downsides of Mortarion in the past, in the previous edition, being that T7, that meant he was more acceptable to take a lot of fire. So a lot of stuff that was the T8 was strength 8 was really, you know, chipping away at Mortarion quite early on in the game, meaning that he's going to die quite early. But now being T8, that makes it a lot more difficult for weapons to actually start penetrating through Mortarion's hide. And do you know what? It should be like that, because Mortarion is the Lord of Death. He is the Lord of Death and Decay. You know, he is one hell of a massive great unit within the 40k universe, and it's only right and fitting that the rules really fit this character. So, you know, that T8 is a massive great plus in, you know, in my book. Now the downside being, you know, going up against Mortarion, it's going to be very, very scary. So if you got your opponent on the other side of the board and they realise he's T8, you know, with bucket loads of wounds, all of a sudden they're going to panic. Now, of course, Mortarion is tough, is also strength 8, so he's going to be an absolute frigging beast once he gets into combat. You know, he has got 7 attacks, so that's quite massive on its own. And he's got a 12-inch move. Now, unfortunately, I don't actually have the codex, the previous codex to hand, but I believe he possibly moved up to 16 inches. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but he's now moving 12 inches across the board. But look, that's not a bad thing, because now the map size is smaller anyway. Doesn't really make much of a difference, if that makes sense. You know, and if that is a problem for yourself, you know, there are other ways of bringing Mortarion onto the battlefield. So Mortarion has a 3-up save, a 4-up invuln, but more importantly, he also has that new rule where you're minusing 1 to your damage. So for instance, if you're being shot by damage 2 weapons, all of a sudden they become only damage 1, and that's massive for Mortarion, because that makes him a lot more survivable. And ideally, that's where you want Mortarion to be. You need him to be survivable to get up the actual board itself. Now, being T8, having that special ability, is going to make that very, very difficult for Mortarion to be taken out. Not only that, there is a Warlord with Mortarion. He can now choose his Warlord Trait, which means in turn that Mortarion can pick the Warlord Trait, which pretty much gives him his old rule back. So all of a sudden now he's got a 5-up Feel No Pain, -1 damage, and he's also got -1 to any damage being taken onto Mortarion. That makes him one hell of, you know, a tankable unit. So as well as he can tank, he can also push out the damage as well. So with Mortarion, when he gets into combat, or even just before he gets into combat, he's still got 2 of his most iconic weapons that Mortarion can hold. 1 being the Lantern, and 2 being that massive great old Silence. Now, with the Lantern, it's got a 12-inch range. It's classed as a pistol, so you can shoot that in close combat. Not only that, is the fact that, you know, it is strength 8, it is -3 damage, it is AP 3 damage, and not only that, you draw a line, and anything that goes underneath that line will also take a single hit from the Lantern as well. So that on its own is very, very, very powerful as a unit. So if, let's say for argument's sake, if Mortarion is going up against a Orky army, and you've got, you know, 5 smasher guns that are beautifully lined out, all of a sudden, Mortarion's all he's got to do is aim for that back one, fire, and then all of a sudden, all those guns are going to take damage. That's strong. That's very, very strong. And that makes Mortarion's Lantern very, very powerful. So let's talk about the Scythe. So let's talk about the Silence. Silence, again, has had an upgrade. So as well as Mortarion being strength 8, Mortarion has 2 profiles to this weapon. One being the Reaping Scythe. So with this profile, it's more designed about taking infantry out. Now the beautiful thing with this, it is strength user, so strength 8, that's massive on its own. So most things you're going to be wounding on 3s. Well, most things you're actually going to be wounding on 2s. Other things you're going to be wounding on 3s. And if you're going up against the big stuff, then you're going to be wounding on 4s. But let's face it, if you're going to be going up stuff that's T8, you're going to be using the other profile. So this Reaping Scythe, when you're actually carving through these, so you've got 7 attacks with Mortarion. But the beautiful thing of that is every attack, you make 3 attacks for each attack. So all of a sudden, that's 15 attacks coming from Mortarion from that Reaping Scythe. So if you're going up against Orcs, for instance, and they've got a squad of 30 man strong, all of a sudden you're taking those Orc boys down to half strength, because you're going to be hitting on 2s, you're going to be wounded on 2s, but depending on what the Orcs are kitted out with or what clan culture they're going with, they're pretty much going to lose 15 Orcs. So that's on its own is quite powerful. So -3, 1 damage apiece. So reroll to 1s into wound with silence is absolutely friggin' massive, and it's going to cause so much trouble on the battlefield and making him a unit that you really don't want to charge. So let's talk about the Devastating Blow. Now, Mortarion we know is strength 8. Now, when you're doing the Devastating Blow, it's ×2 on his strength. So that's a strength 16 attack coming in on your opponent. So again, most things on the battlefield, you're going to be wounding on 2s. Unless you're going up something that can only be wounding on 4s, Mortarion is going to have an absolute friggin' field day. He really is going to hammer the hell out of a lot of the big stuff with this attack. And that makes that, quite a devastating blow. Now, not only is that, a cool thing about it, it is -3. Now, the next part is where it gets even juicier. It's a plague weapon, so you're re-rolling the 1s to wound. But not only that is the fact that with that devastating blow, in the past it used to be D6, now it's D3 +3. So that's pretty much, you're going to guarantee getting off 4 wounds attack. That is quite massive. Like, if you think about it, if you get Mortarion into combat with an Imperial Knight, and I'm going to say Imperial Knight because that's probably a good example. If Mortarion gets in battle with an Imperial Knight, he can strip, and if he gets every one of his attacks off, he can take out an Imperial Knight a turn. That's scary. I don't think I know many units on the battlefield that can take out a knight in 1 round of combat. Think about that. So, the things that Mortarion are going to really struggle if he comes up against, so for instance the Nightbringer, Ghazghkull, they're 2 units that are going to pretty much just going to shrug off those attacks and going to laugh and go, yeah, whatever, bro. Whatever. I could probably stick it out for you for a round or 2. Actually, you can't, because even with Ghazghkull, if you get him into combat with Mortarion, and this is going to hurt me and it's going to make me sad, but if Ghazghkull and Mortarion go head to head in combat, yes, Ghazghkull could shrug off a turn with Mortarion, but when it comes to round 2, Mortarion is more than likely going to just kill Ghazghkull off, unless something freaky happens and, like, Mortarion all of a sudden he starts rolling loads and loads of 1s and 1s again, then we're going to see a totally different game. So this makes Mortarion hell of a scary beast for 490 points. Look, let me know what you think. If you think I'm right, and you think that Mortarion is definitely well worth taking, it'd be interesting to see what the rest of the community thinks. So all of a sudden, Mortarion coming across the board. Now picture this. Big death and decay, clouds of smoke and flies bellowing across the buildings, across the landscape, through the trees, and all of a sudden you see the Lord of Death just peering down at you, like with his big old man Reaper, and the lantern just glowing in the background. He gets into combat, your opponent is not going to be able to take him out. There's not enough firepower on most armies to take him out in 1 round of shooting. He's going to be up the board quite quickly. So with Mortarion, you've got the Feel No Pain, you've got the -1 damage, you've got the strength, you've got the psychic abilities. You know, there is some really cool stuff that you can chuck upon Mortarion, even in the psychic phase. I think for me, Smite would definitely be one of them. So with Mortarion, he also has an aura ability where he actually reduces down 1 to your opponent's toughness, which is quite massive. So a 9-inch bubble guaranteed every round makes him quite massive. So you could give him the gift of the plagues, which is basically going to give him a 12-inch bubble, making sure anything around him is going to be -1 toughness. So all of a sudden, the things that you would have worried about going into combat with, you know, being at T8 is now T7. So you really are going to guarantee doing some damage. But that's not so much Mortarion causing that damage. It's more that if Mortarion's up the front of the board, giving this, you know, dishing out damage, it means all the rest of the firepower that's coming up the board is all suddenly making everything else a lot softer and a lot palatable for their weaponry to fire. So all of a sudden, you know, let's take for argument's sake, Marines being fired upon by Death Guard. If Mortarion's in, you know, up close to him, you know, with Mortarion firing that onto him, with that aura, all of a sudden their bolters are now wounding Marines on freeze. So that on its own is quite impressive and quite powerful. You know, his lantern, if you're firing something up within 12 inches and you've got that psychic spell off, if you're shooting that against let's say a Land Raider, a Repulsor, a Warlord, you know, an Imperial Knight, all of a sudden that's now T7. So even the lantern is now wounding stuff on freeze. That is strong and powerful and makes it, you know, a well-worthy thing to take. Now, another one I thought was really good for Mortarion is the Molester of Pestilence. Hopefully I got that one right. So it's an awesome psychic ability where anything firing upon Mortarion all of a sudden becomes -1 to hit. Picture this. So now you've got that psychic spell off. You're going into your opponent's next turn. So all of a sudden it's -1 to hit Mortarion. It's also giving the Mortarion a 3-up, 4-up invulnerable save. If you go for his invulnerable save, he's also got the ability to do -1 to your damage. And he's also got his Feel No Pain if you're taking the right Warlord Trait. So Mortarion all of a sudden is across your board and he is absolutely smashing your back doors in, and there's nothing you can do to stop him. He is really going to, he's going to pull apart Marines. He's going to even grab out old Gillyman, Silly Gilly, and slap him around the tabletop, because even if Gilly comes back, he's just going to say, yeah, whatever, bro. You're dead. I'm going to kill you again. It really does make Mortarion a foe to be afraid of. Hopefully you've enjoyed this little video insight on Mortarion, and hopefully I'll catch you all again on another video, whether it be Paint and Guide, Battle Report, or another tactical video. Catch you all soon.